What if the Springboks' strangely conservative performance in Buenos Aires was not a warning sign at all, but a carefully calculated disguise? South Africa walked away from Estadio José Amalfitani with a 17-10 victory over Argentina, but the manner of that win left plenty of questions. The Springboks were far from their most dominant, their attack lacked its usual spark, and Argentina arguably produced enough to deserve a different result. Yet with the rugby's greatest rivalry against the All Blacks now just around the corner, there is another possibility. Perhaps Rassie Erasmus and his coaching staff simply had no intention of showing their full hand. Before the match, Erasmus made it clear that South Africa would not treat Argentina as a warm-up for New Zealand. He insisted that doing so would be disrespectful to Felipe Contepomi and his Los Pumas side, and the Springboks certainly did not want any suggestion of complacency. But there was another way to avoid revealing their plans for the All Blacks: simply do not use them against Argentina. The timing of the match made that possibility particularly interesting. South Africa's massive rugby's greatest rivalry series against New Zealand begins at Ellis Park on August 22, and with so much attention already focused on the All Blacks, every tactical decision in Buenos Aires could have been analysed for clues. Instead, the Springboks produced a performance that was effective but unusually restrained. Argentina started strongly and immediately put the world champions under pressure, controlling territory and possession while forcing South Africa to defend for long periods. The Pumas also stood up to one of the Springboks' biggest weapons, their world-leading scrum, while their maul defense was equally impressive. In the air, Argentina often appeared more composed, and defensively they were outstanding throughout the contest. Their discipline was another major positive. Argentina are often criticized for giving away penalties and allowing matches to become emotionally charged, but this time they stayed remarkably controlled. They conceded just 7 penalties compared with South Africa's 8, and there was little of the off-the-ball drama that has sometimes followed Argentina in big test matches. Then came the attacking numbers, and they painted an even more surprising picture. Argentina completed 189 passes compared with South Africa's 147, created 8 line breaks to the Springboks' 4, and produced a massive 226 post-contact meters compared with only 22 for the visitors. Even the possession battle told a story of Argentine pressure, particularly late in the match, when Los Pumas controlled 86% of possession during the final 10 minutes. South Africa's one clear advantage in the attacking statistics was their number of carries, with the Springboks making 148 compared with Argentina's 129. But those numbers also highlight how unusual the performance was. The Springboks did not dominate the game in the way many expected from the reigning world champions. Instead, they absorbed pressure, took their opportunities and protected their lead. That approach can certainly be criticized, and the amount of kicking was one of the biggest frustrations. South Africa kicked the ball 43 times, while Argentina kicked 38. But the difference becomes even more striking when the kicks are compared with passing. Argentina kicked once for every 5 passes, while South Africa kicked once every 3.4 passes. In other words, the Springboks were far more willing to put the ball into the air rather than constantly build attacking phases. On the surface, that could suggest a team struggling for ideas. But there is another interpretation. Perhaps Erasmus did not want to give New Zealand a detailed preview of South Africa's attacking plans. Against the All Blacks, the Springboks will face a completely different tactical challenge, and revealing too much in Buenos Aires could have given their biggest rivals valuable information. Rugby at the highest level is not only about what a team does, sometimes it is also about what a team chooses not to show. That makes the 17-10 result particularly intriguing. Argentina may genuinely have been the better side for significant periods, and the Pumas certainly deserve credit for the way they defended, attacked, and pressured the world champions. South Africa cannot simply dismiss those weaknesses, especially with New Zealand waiting. But the Springboks still achieved the most important objective: they left Argentina with a test victory, avoided major injury concerns and, perhaps most importantly, did not reveal everything they have prepared for the All Blacks. The real test of this theory will arrive at Ellis Park. If South Africa suddenly unleash a more aggressive attack, vary their kicking strategy, improve their aerial contest and return to their familiar physical dominance against New Zealand, the Buenos Aires performance may look very different in hindsight. It could turn out that what appeared to be a dull and frustrating Springboks display was actually a carefully managed exercise in tactical secrecy. Of course, only Rassie Erasmus and his coaching staff know how much of the performance was deliberate and how much was simply the result of Argentina playing extremely well. But that uncertainty is exactly what makes the result so fascinating. The Springboks did not look like the unstoppable machine many expected in Buenos Aires, yet they still found a way to win. And perhaps that is the biggest clue of all. With the All Blacks now waiting, South Africa may have been perfectly happy to leave Argentina with the victory while leaving New Zealand with plenty of questions. The real answers will come on August 22nd, when the cards finally have to be placed on the table.
What if the Springboks' underwhelming performance in Buenos Aires was not simply a bad night at the office, but a carefully controlled tactical operation? South Africa left Argentina with a 17-10 victory over Los Pumas, yet the scoreline does not tell the full story. For long periods, the Springboks looked uncomfortable, Argentina controlled territory, the Pumas defended with enormous intensity, and South Africa struggled to produce the kind of attacking rugby that has become associated with the world champions. In fact, if you only looked at the statistics and the flow of the match, you could easily argue that Argentina deserved to win. But with the rugby's greatest rivalry against the All Blacks now approaching rapidly, there is another possibility that cannot be ignored. Perhaps the Springboks deliberately kept their tactical cards close to their chest. Before the match, Rassie Erasmus was very clear that South Africa would not disrespect Argentina by treating the Buenos Aires test as nothing more than preparation for New Zealand. He also knew that any public discussion about the All Blacks before facing Felipe Contepomi's Pumas could create an unnecessary distraction. The Springboks therefore had every reason to focus publicly on Argentina. But focusing on Argentina did not necessarily mean showing everything they had prepared for the All Blacks. That distinction is important, because international rugby at the highest level is as much about information as it is about physical performance. Coaches study every detail. They examine attacking shapes, kicking patterns, defensive systems, set-piece variations, and even the positioning of individual players. When two of the world's biggest rugby nations are preparing to face each other, giving away unnecessary tactical information can be extremely costly. And that makes South Africa's strange performance in Buenos Aires worth examining much more closely. Argentina started the match with confidence and immediately put the visitors under pressure. The Pumas controlled territory and possession during important stages, forcing South Africa to defend repeatedly rather than allowing the Springboks to dictate the contest. Argentina also showed that they were prepared to challenge South Africa physically. The Springbok scrum has become one of their most feared weapons, but the Pumas stood up to that challenge. Their maul defense was also impressive, preventing South Africa from turning one of their traditional strengths into easy attacking momentum. Even in the aerial contest, Argentina often appeared more comfortable and organized. For a team facing the world champions, it was an encouraging performance, and it created genuine problems for Erasmus' side. What was perhaps even more impressive was Argentina's discipline. Los Pumas have sometimes been their own worst enemy when matches become heated, particularly against physically demanding opponents. This time, however, they remained remarkably composed. There were hardly any unnecessary confrontations, and the penalty count actually favored Argentina. The Pumas conceded 7 penalties compared with 8 from South Africa. That may sound like a small detail, but against the Springboks, discipline can often determine whether pressure turns into points. Argentina avoided giving South Africa too many cheap opportunities, and that helped keep the world champions under pressure. The attacking statistics also underline just how competitive Argentina were. Los Pumas completed 189 passes compared with South Africa's 147. They produced 8 line breaks while the Springboks managed only 4, showing that Argentina were creating more opportunities to threaten the South African defensive line. The post-contact meters were even more striking. Argentina produced 226 meters after contact, while South Africa managed just 22. That enormous difference suggests that the Pumas were winning collisions and continuing to move forward after initial contact, while the Springboks were not generating their usual level of momentum. Argentina also enjoyed a huge amount of possession late in the game, controlling 86% of the ball during the final 10 minutes. Normally, that kind of pressure against South Africa would be a recipe for disaster. Yet the Springboks survived. And that ability to survive may be one of the most important aspects of the match. South Africa were not at their best, but they still managed to keep Argentina from converting pressure into enough points to take the victory. That is a familiar feature of successful Springboks teams. They may not always dominate every minute, but they know how to stay alive in difficult matches. They know how to defend a narrow lead, manage territory, and wait for the opposition to make a mistake. Against Argentina, that approach once again produced a result. However, one area that frustrated supporters was South Africa's kicking strategy. The Springboks kicked the ball 43 times, compared with Argentina's 38. More importantly, the relationship between kicking and passing showed how conservative South Africa were. Argentina kicked once for every 5 passes, while South Africa kicked once for every 3.4 passes. That meant the Springboks were putting the ball into the air considerably more often relative to their passing game. To some observers, this looked like a lack of attacking ambition. To others, it may have been evidence of a team deliberately avoiding unnecessary risk. If South Africa had arrived in Buenos Aires determined to showcase every attacking variation they planned to use against New Zealand, the match could have provided the All Blacks with valuable footage. Instead, the Springboks frequently chose territory over extended attacking sequences. They kicked, defended, absorbed pressure and waited for opportunities. That does not necessarily make the performance entertaining, but it can make it strategically useful. Consider the bigger picture. The All Blacks are not Argentina. New Zealand will present a completely different challenge, with different defensive structures, different attacking threats and different expectations. The Springboks will need to be far more precise against their greatest rivals. They will also need to manage the psychological side of the contest. When South Africa and New Zealand meet, the intensity rises immediately.